welcome back to Ensuring Success. We are live from AMS Pictures in Dallas, Texas, and I am Gail Perry, Editor-in-Chief of CPA Practice Advisor magazine. We're here today with 10 hours of continuing education sessions for you that are all amazing, and we're about to do another one that is going to knock your socks off. But first, I'd like to give a quick shout out to all of our sponsors who make this event possible, and that includes Canopy, CPA.com, eFileforBiz.com, Intuit Pro Connect, Peisner Johnson, Receipt Bank, Sage, Xero, Avalara, and Boomer Consulting. And in particular, we're noting that Avalara and Peisner Johnson are sponsors of this particular session. So you'll be hearing more about them throughout this session. For those of you who are just joining us, I'd like to explain to you how CPE works for this session. During the session, we will pause 3 times to display a CPE code on your screen. It'll appear at the bottom of the screen, and I'll mention it to make sure that you're watching and can write down that code. It's a 3-digit number that you'll want to write down and save, so when you get all 3 3-digit numbers, that'll be the codes that you need to get your CPE certificate for this session. And at the end of the day, when you've finished all of your sessions, you'll go to the tab at the top of your screen that says Get Your CE/CPE Credit, and that's where you'll be asked to enter the codes that you saved for each session you attended, and you'll get your CPE certificates. I would like to introduce our sponsors, as I mentioned, are Avalara and Peisner Johnson for this session, and I'd like to introduce our panel, and then I'll have them tell you a little bit about themselves, and then we'll get into the session about Wayfair and the SALT moment. So next to me, I'm Jason Parr, and then Andy Johnson and Ray Bigley.
Hi.
So go ahead, I'd like the 3 of you to introduce yourselves.
You bet. My name is Jason Parr. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Peisner Johnson. I've been with Peisner Johnson for 22 years. Back when I started with Peisner Johnson, I was a staff assistant, and I had hair, and it was brown. A lot has changed over the last 20 years. Gail, it's great to meet you. It's great to be here. I'm excited to have an opportunity to have a good conversation today.
Excellent. So I'm Andy Johnson. I'm the co-founder of Peisner Johnson & Company. And our business is to help companies avoid devastating sales tax audits. And so Jason runs the show, and I do speeches like this with Avalara and Ray Bigley.
Yeah, I'm Ray Bigley. I'm Vice President of Business Development at Avalara. And Gail, thanks for having us back again. It's a fun year to be talking about sales tax. There's a lot that's gone on, and let's jump right into it.
Yeah, let's hear about, well, let's actually do a really brief summary about what Wayfair is for those who might not have been totally on top of what's happened in sales taxes this year.
Andy, go
Sure.
ahead.
All right. So Wayfair, if you haven't heard of Wayfair, Wayfair is a really big deal because Wayfair overturned a 1992 Supreme Court decision, Quill. You've probably heard of that one. Quill said before another state can force you to collect their taxes, you have to have a physical presence in that state. Wayfair said, no, it's not about physical presence. It's about where you have customers. And if you have even one customer, you might have Nexus in another state. So it's still about Nexus, but Nexus is a lot easier to have now. So businesses might have sales tax obligations in states where they never had obligations before.
Yeah, and thanks to Greg, who was just on the last panel. It was his great state of South Dakota that prompted this whole thing. So Greg, a shout out to you.
Excellent. Okay, and then let's see, what do you mean by the SALT moment?
Okay,
Yeah.
so we wrote this ebook that Ray printed out for us called The SALT Moment. So this is just our way of describing for CPAs, tax advisors, that yes, Nexus has been an evolving issue for years now. Maybe the last 10 years, it's been something we've been talking about and warning about, that you really need to be on top of this for your clients. You need to protect your clients. But with Wayfair, it's almost like a tsunami. It's like an earthquake, and the tsunami is coming. It's come, right? Yeah. And CPAs just need to be aware that their clients are under attack, but also see it as an opportunity. It's the moment for SALT, state and local taxes. So this is the time to jump in help your clients, but build your practice as you're doing this.
You know, the way I look at it, and Andy talked about it a bit earlier, is that the conversation's changed. And for the average accountant, do you really know who the customers are of your clients? You know, you may know the large ones, but you may not know the distribution and what states they're in. You may not be aware of where those customers are. And so having a conversation, we all should be able to do that. And I think it's very important to do that with for your clients and understanding where their customers are. And, you know, Jason can tell you that the old rules don't go away. And there's some things that we're going to talk about today that really give credence to that. The information that Amazon is giving to states, all those things mean that your client information that you don't think states have, they likely have it already, so are going to get it over the next several months.
Well, let me just speak to that because what I see as Wayfair and Economic Nexus is an expansion of the marketplace. So with an expanding ease to creating Nexus, there's an expanding responsibility for compliance and working with legislation that's coming out. So for us, as we were approaching this ruling by the Supreme Court, we began to see that, you know, we're speculating what's going to happen. And upon that, everybody has a contingency for what to do when that occurs. And then they ruled in favor of the state. And in that situation, there's a bit of a frenzy, and then there's a step back, and there's looking at legislation. And many states came on board with South Dakota to mirror their legislation. So once that occurred, we began to see there are several effective dates happening this year, and many happening at the turn of the year. So from our perspective as a firm, we had to look at all of our client base and begin to understand how this was going to impact them. We had an increased amount of calls coming in, inquiries trying to determine what they do in this situation, but we also had to take a proactive measure and understand where are our clients located, where are their customers located, and then we have, for a majority of our clients, we have their sales data going back. So we began to run reports and identify where customers are and whether they were reaching those thresholds. And obviously you have to do that on a state-by-state basis based on the effective dates.
And Andy, if you're not a state and local tax accountant, what can you do? What can you do to help your clients?
Well, number one, Ray, what we always say is you've got to at least know where your clients have customers. So if we step back to Wayfair for a minute, Wayfair said if you have 100 transactions in a state during a 12-month period, then that state can force you to collect their sales tax. Or if you exceed 100,000 in sales in a calendar period, then you could have Nexus in that state. And even before Wayfair was passed down or handed down, 18 states already had laws to that effect, even though they contradicted the Quill decision. So now there's 30 plus states that are just saying, oh, well, is that the rule? Then if that's the rule, that's what we're going to do. So thinking of just regular accountants who are tax advisors, now they need to know not just where clients have storefronts or where they have employees. Usually they know those things. Now they have to go another level and find out information that usually they don't have, which is where are your customers? Because if you exceed the 200 transactions in a state or 100,000 in sales, then you could have a sales tax collection responsibility.
Okay, great. And Jason, how does that apply to these states that have requested information from Amazon? What does that mean for an accounting firm's clients?
Well, this is pretty significant because a state requesting Amazon to provide seller information, sales, federal ID numbers, et cetera, can be for two purposes. One, it could be to identify if a seller on Amazon has had Nexus for a period of time, right? So we're talking about Wayfair and Economic Nexus, but the one caution I would give you is there can be other types of Nexus that have been established. One of those could be that you had inventory that you sold on Amazon that were in one of the 26 or 27 states at the time. where you could have nexus because of that situation. So there's two things that can happen. A state can look at this seller's list and say they had nexus going back, which is an exposure situation, or they simply could be looking, if they have economic nexus legislation, could just be looking at the previous calendar year to determine, based on that total sales, do they have a requirement to register either within the last month or two or soon. So that's two areas that they can find.
Yeah, so even though a state adopts Wayfair at the end of this year, they could get data going back, several years.
Right. A seller could have been doing business, for instance, Wisconsin is the most recent. A seller could have been doing business in 2015 when Wisconsin became what we call an Amazon state for nexus creating activity with inventory. And so when we're looking at our clients' records, we really have to look at two things. Number one, we have to look at where their customers are and whether they've exceeded certain thresholds. Number two, we have to be careful that we just don't automatically say, you got to go register because you exceed these thresholds, because there could have been other nexus creating activities that have occurred prior to this new legislation, which could create exposure for our clients and customers of your clients.
So
Okay.
go ahead, Gail.
Yeah, just before we continue with that, we're going to display the first CPE code for this session on the bottom of your screen right now. So be sure to write down this number. It's a 3-digit number. You'll get 2 more during the course of this session. And that number, all 3 numbers that you'll collect during the session, are your evidence of attending. So if you're planning on getting CPE credit for this session, be sure to write down that number. Okay, Andy, you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say, you guys have mentioned Wisconsin, and Wisconsin is the latest state. We just did a podcast on this yesterday, Ray, because Amazon has announced. So anybody who sells on Amazon, and speaking to CPAs and tax advisors, you really need to understand if your clients are selling on Amazon, because Amazon just notified all of their sellers, whether they fulfilled by Amazon FBA sellers or fulfilled by merchant FBM sellers, all got this notification. And it's going to spark questions to tax advisors, CPAs. And what Amazon said is, we got a valid request from Wisconsin that they want information from us, and we're going to give it to them. We're going to give it to them December 17th. And what they asked for, what Wisconsin asked for, and what Amazon's going to give to them is seller information. Anybody who made sales to a customer in Wisconsin from any location, worldwide, who made a sale in Wisconsin during 2017, we want their name, their address, their FEIN, and we want to know how much in sales they made, and if any, how much tax they collected. So Wisconsin's going to have this information. So if any of your clients sell using Amazon, and CPAs may not even know that. A lot of people are trying to sell on Amazon. They may have got in, they get out. It's not a financial statement thing. You get your financial statement, it shows your total sales. It doesn't necessarily show that it came through Amazon. So CPAs may not even be aware of this. So now you're going to have clients saying, hey, I got this notice. It's about tax. You're my trusted tax advisor. What do I do about this? And Wisconsin's just the latest. There's 5 other states. So we throw out a lot of numbers. There's 30 states that do economic presence, but there's 5 other states where Amazon has already agreed to furnish information about their customers. And the very next thing that they're going to get is a communication from that state saying, hey, we noticed you've been selling in our state, and looks like you crossed our thresholds. In Wisconsin's case, you probably had inventory in Wisconsin since 2015, so you have potential back tax exposure. And they're going to come to you as the tax advisor and say, what do I do about this?
Yeah. I mean, it just gets more complicated.
It does.
Like all tax law, anytime there's new legislation, you have to be aware of the old as well as the new. Gail, do you have the poll question?
I do.
Do you have that teed?
Yep, I do.
Teed up? Maybe we could do that right now because it's pertinent to where we want to go.
Okay, our first question, and we'd like you to ideally use an auxiliary device. to go to slido.com, slido.com, and we've queued up a question asking if you are talking to your clients right now about 2018 tax changes. Is that the first? We'll
Yeah,
do that
that's
one
it.
first.
Yeah.
And so it's slido.com. You enter the code December CPE, that'll get you into the polling. And also the beautiful thing about slido.com is there's an area where you can post questions as well. So if you have questions for any of our panelists, you can post them in slido.com and also answer that question for us so we can find out how many of you are talking to your clients about, in general, 2018 tax changes, not just sales tax, but tax changes in general.
Yeah, and I think that the point that we want to make here, and don't let this influence your answers, but the point we want to make is obviously there have been a number of changes that are pertinent to clients in 2018 on the corporate and the income tax side. And the conversation is very noisy on that side, and it's been for the majority of the year. But it's what would be interesting is how many, as part of that conversation, are actually talking about these sales tax changes that could also have substantive consequences for clients. And the thought is that depending on the firm, the sales tax conversation may get left out.
So we're getting answers still coming in, but it's looking like about 82% are saying yes, that they are having conversations about taxes. So that's a huge percentage.
That is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's actually shocking to me.
Yeah. Well,
But that's good shock.
I don't know how I worded it. You know, 82% are talking about sales tax, or
No, this is just tax
Yeah,
in
just
general.
tax in
So
general.
the 2018 tax changes.
That's right.
So not just sales. We're going to go to a sales tax question in a minute, but we'll let a few more of these answers come in.
Yeah.
That's why I was shocked about that, because I thought you were asking how many of you are talking about sales tax, because my experience is that many accountants and CPAs are like, I don't get involved in sales tax, and I don't want to bring up a question with the client, and then the next thing they do is ask me a question.
Yeah.
And so I just want to stay away from this. And this is what we find so much of what we do is just helping CPAs recognize that there is a significant risk for their clients, but it's not so much preaching that this is what you ought to do. It's more like, look, our mission is to protect businesses from devastating sales tax audits. Nobody wants their client to be audited for sales tax. So what kind of conversation can you legitimately have with the client? Well, you can definitely know about Nexus. You really can. You can become a Nexus guru and learn to have that conversation. You should be having that conversation.
And in fact, there's a link you can type in and search on Avalara Wayfair. And if you click on that first link, you can go to a web page and you can go down. There's a Nexus tool that you can use. And then there's also a view of a map that has all the substantive changes over the last few months and when the states are going to adopt a specific tax legislation over the next year.
I'm really glad you brought that up. Sorry, Gail. I'm really glad you brought that up, Ray, because when we survey accountants and CPAs, typically their first struggle with state and local taxes is just trying to stay on top of the changes. And this is one area that's changing right now as we speak. Rapidly. I mean, we have this resource that you should go to. So Avalara provides this excellent resource. It's a beautiful map. It will tell you what the current status of the economic presence laws are, what's happening, they got a tool to help you evaluate whether your clients have Nexus. So it's a free tool. It's a really great resource.
Now, not to beat a dead horse, but that tool also provides other types of Nexus creating activities. So the economic Nexus aspect of that is wonderful, but there's other types of Nexus people should be aware of, just because you don't want to expose a customer in a situation where you get them registered without knowing that there were activities that could have exposed them earlier on.
You know, go ahead,
Yeah, I
Gail.
just want to jump in again. That is avalara.com/wayfair.
No.
I
I sent you.
Google it.
You have to Google it. I sent you the link. It's a
Okay, yeah.
long link, and
It's
I
a long
apologize
link, yeah.
for not having it.
But I'm sure we can, if
Just
when-
Google Avalara Wayfair
If you,
Nexus or something
not
like
gonna be
that.
able to
You'll
see
get
his
to it.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
We're
But
going to
if
have
you
it for
Google
you.
Avalara Wayfair,
We're
you'll
going to
see-
have it on the screen in about 2 minutes, so we'll be
okay,
able to
great.
show it to you. And then also, when you registered for this event, one of the things we will do is send you what we're calling a digital tote bag. It's in about a week or so, which will have some information from each of our sponsors, and we'll include that link in that information. So you'll get it in your email. I just want to throw up the other poll that we wanted to do here, which is, have you mentioned sales tax to your clients in conjunction with the Supreme Court ruling of South Dakota versus Wayfair? So we'll leave that up there in Slido.com while we're continuing our conversation.
Yeah, so that's good. We have a benchmark of 82%
right.
roughly said they talk about tax changes, and now we'll be able to compare who talks about
I'm
sales
sure
taxes.
it's 80%.
Just
Oh,
tell the
I,
truth.
you know, yeah.
No, no.
You know, we could have a bet
It's
here.
got to be small.
Yeah, it's
gotta
going to
be
be
small.
over.
Over
No.
more than 80.
You know, one of the conversations that we had earlier, Jason, is you mentioned that you had a client. When we talk about these things, we talk about it in terms of, you know, selling through marketplaces and selling over the internet. Does this affect clients that are just have remote sales?
Great point. You know, we service clients in all sorts of industries. So when it comes to economic nexus, a lot of people think e-commerce. They think the online platforms. They don't necessarily think about a manufacturer that might be in 2 states that sells into 40 states. And because their customers are in those 40 states, not only if their end user sales might have a responsibility to register for sales and use tax through economic nexus, but they may need to know, because of their nexus requirement, even if their sales are all wholesale, the type of certificates they should be collecting or using in relation to their business. So just to give you an example, we have a brick and mortar client that sells online. They're in a few states. They sell online, and they've never had a significant issue when it relates to nexus creating activities that we were aware of. And so when Wayfair occurred and we started looking at their potential economic nexus, we identified multiple states where they probably should register going forward based on effective dates, which are in your chart. But then as we began to look at their sales and ask more questions, we found out that they sell on Amazon, that they're an FBA seller, to expand not only their website sales, to expand their marketplace to do more in the U.S. And so that halted us at that point because we could simply just register them. But now we needed to look at the materiality of their sales in those other jurisdictions and when they began to create nexus in those jurisdictions. So lots of industries, every industry really has that impact if they're registered in a few states but have customers in multiple states.
Yeah, and the other point is that people are collecting sales tax in multiple ways, just like you just talked about. So we call this omni-channel selling. So you're billing your customer the normal way through your invoicing system. Then you're selling on your own e-commerce platform, and then you're also selling through Amazon, and Amazon's collecting tax. And in fact, Amazon in some states may remit that tax directly. Yep. So you have requirements to report the tax that you've collected. You have requirements to net out the tax that Amazon's paid on your behalf already. So in particular states, it's gotten fairly complex. And when you look at a sales tax return being, well, I'm just reporting what I've collected, it's a little bit more complex than what it used to be.
Well, and it can get very complex, right? There's a lot of rules, and this omni-channel is one thing that can create complexities in compliance. But I'll just say that it starts with nexus. You're always looking there from an advisor standpoint. That's something you can learn, you can understand, you can see the risk involved, you can see both exposure and also prospective registrations that should occur. Andy wrote a great book, Start with Nexus, and we would just repeat that over and over again, that tax advisors, that's where you start to really understand how to help your clients.
Great book and Nexus. I don't know if they go together, Andy,
Page turner is a
I'm sure it was. I'm sure it was riveting.
Well, it was good enough to be number one, right?
Exactly. So, Gail, what were the results?
All right. Our results are 27% say I occasionally mention sales tax when I talk with my clients. 25% I discuss sales tax frequently.
Oh.
And 22% I only talk about sales tax when a client brings it up. So we need to do a little
pretty
work there, I
common,
think.
yeah.
But we
Yeah.
do also have that map we'd like to display for you
Great.
right now. So this map can give you a perspective on how crazy the sales tax landscape is right now. We're displaying the link. Oh, I'm sorry. We're displaying the link. You're going to have to find the map.
Go to the link.
Yeah, go to the
Yeah,
link
yeah, go to
later.
the link.
Save that link, and you'll be able to see a visual on what the sales tax landscape is at the moment.
It's a very simple approach to seeing it in a one-page format or in one illustration.
Well, it's a free resource, and when we talk to CPAs, they say, well, how do we stay on top of this? Well, that's a perfect way to do it, and you really can speak authoritatively on those issues. So I'm going to put you on the hot spot just a little bit,
Sure.
Jason. When we will, and every time Amazon announces that they're going to turn over information on their sellers, I mean, I think Massachusetts was the first one, and we know from talking to Amazon tax people that they went to the mat to try to keep from doing this. But now it just seems like they're just,
Yeah.
Turning
What are
it
they-
over.
There's 7 now? What is it?
I think Wisconsin was the 6th one that
Yeah,
requested it
this-
and is giving to it. So when we have a client of ours say, Jason, what should we do about this? You're in this every day, so what do you say?
Yeah, so in a situation like that, the first question that comes into my mind is, what is Wisconsin looking for, right? Are they looking for a calendar year of sales to determine prospective registration, or could they potentially, in their efforts, turn up exposure because you've been registered or should have been registered there longer ago? So what we will typically do is we start with Nexus. We want to identify any Nexus creating activities, and that could be any Nexus creating activities, not just economic Nexus. Then we're going to look at the taxability of what you sell. That's going to help us understand what your exposure could be based on first date of Nexus, taxability of your product or services, the gross sales in those jurisdictions, and what's your materiality. And then we're going to make a recommendation to you, and we're going to counsel together with you as your advisor. Recommendations would be register on the effective date or on a prospective basis, register in a retroactive, which is rare that we suggest that, or if there's significant exposure and the state has not reached out to you by letter or some other format, then we're going to encourage either an amnesty program or a voluntary disclosure program, some way to try to mitigate the exposure but allow you to get compliant. And so we're going to spend time with you going through all states, all sales, all situations, whether it's omni-channel, whatever the case may be. And then we work together to make that determination and then move forward. Our goal is always to avoid devastating sales tax audits. And that's one way that we do that, is to help you get compliant on your actual Nexus footprint. But in doing that, we're always trying to mitigate or save you as many dollars as possible in getting compliant.
Yeah, and I think, when you look at those numbers, 25%, 27%, it's a much easier conversation to have today, because everybody, I say everybody, most people are buying, online. And so if you just think about your own experience, you can talk to your clients about it, and you can say, are you selling online? And then you can start having the conversation around your customers. And it can be very easy. You can say, the tax laws are different than they used to be. And, it used to be rules around physical presence, used to be rules around employees in a state, yada, yada, yada. And now, we need to look at your customers. Where are your customers? And to me, that's a conversation that any accountant should be able to have with their client.
Well, you bring up a great point, because we're in sales tax all the time. It's almost all we do. And so we're talking about it. We're excited about these situations, not in a sense of the state having greater opportunity to reach out to taxpayers, but being on top of it and understanding how to help our clients. So it's always surprising to me, and I guess the numbers spell it out, when we proactively reach out to our client base to help them understand what Wayfair means for them and Economic Nexus, that they're not familiar with it. So we're thinking in our minds, you haven't heard about this? But everybody hasn't heard about it, and they're not excited about it.
Yeah.
And some people are trying to avoid it. They may have heard about it, but they don't want to actually dig into the details of it because either it's complex or I don't want to know the answer.
Yeah.
So starting with Nexus, you can really begin to understand it and know answers, and then that's when you can really help.
Well, I mean, this idea of not wanting to know, you stand to get caught. If Amazon and other online market sellers, by the way, will also give data to states, the probability of being identified is much greater.
Yeah, it's skyrocketing.
State by state by state.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to hop in real quickly with a break. We want to learn a little bit more about our sponsor. And right after this commercial break, we'll be back with your second CPE code for this session. So don't go away.
If you sell online, you know how much work it can be. The last thing you want to do is spend a lot of time figuring out how to deal with sales tax. TrustFile makes filing sales tax a breeze, even if you file in many states. Signing up takes just a moment. Once you're in, choose your e-commerce software. TrustFile supports automatic syncing from many popular e-commerce systems. We also make importing data a snap. Just export transactions from any e-commerce platform and upload them. No reformatting necessary. After a few seconds, you'll see the states where you collect tax show up on your dashboard. TrustFile fully supports filing in every state that collects sales tax. Choose the form you file for each state and your basic configuration is done. When your tax return is due, we'll send you an email to remind you. You'll then be guided through a series of simple steps to file your tax. The first time around, you'll be prompted to add your state and federal registration numbers. After that, we'll have everything we need to prepare your returns. From then on, filing tax returns will be just a click away. TrustFile is the only sales tax software that accurately handles refunds, exempt sales, shipping tax, and early filing discounts. You'll feel confident you're paying the tax you collected on time and accurately. Congratulations, filing sales tax just became the easiest task in your list.
And we are back. And at the bottom of the screen, you should see the second CPE code for this session, a 3-digit number. So be sure to record that code if you would like to get CPE credit for this session. And so we're back, and we're talking more about Wayfair and sales tax. And I think what I'd really like to ask is specifically, why are you guys calling this the SALT moment? What is it about right now? Obviously, there's a lot of change and disruption going on, but why is this such an incredible moment for accounting firms?
Thank you for asking that, Gail, because as I was listening to Ray talk, you should be able to have an easy conversation with your clients. I totally agree. And this is what the SALT moment really is all about. With the Wayfair case coming down and just revolutionizing. I mean, we've talked about this for a long time, as I mentioned, Gail, that states have been lobbying. There's been legislation, even passed by the Senate, marketplace fairness. A lot of talk about we got the streamlined sales tax, all these things. But Wayfair, this decision and these thresholds that they agreed to is more than the states ever could have wanted. Yeah. It's the most egregious from a sales, from a company perspective, business perspective. It seems like, wow, government is a huge overreach, but that's where we are. So the SALT moment is your opportunity. You might be cautious in talking to your clients because they might say, hey, why didn't you bring this up sooner? Why didn't you tell me? Why are you telling me about this now? Well, it's because it's the SALT moment, and this Wayfair decision is what's giving you that entry point into your clients to have that conversation saying, hey, there's this recent decision, and I need to inform you about it, and we need to talk about what the impact of that is.
Well, there was a recognition on the fact that states were losing revenue. And I think that, regardless of where you stand on the political side of the conversation, states need money. They need money to operate. And the states themselves they built up enough demand to say, we got to rectify this situation. And more sales are not being taxed. People are getting goods and they're coming in different ways. And the whole method of commerce has changed. And so it seems as if that this SALT moment is really just a conversation about how commerce has changed and how the reaction and how states have gotten to the point of dealing with that.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I always caution CPAs. So we're tax nerds. We all are. That's why we're in this business. And we tend to get a little too excited about requirements. And we tend to project that onto our clients like, you better fill out these forms. But I caution all of us constantly, we don't want, first of all, we are business owners ourselves. We want to put ourselves in the shoes of our clients. This is a really tough thing to deal with, but what's your alternative because if you just avoid it altogether, you're setting yourself up for a huge potential audit assessment. Or are there alternatives? Are there software that can help you with this? And we should just, so one of the things I always say is you can learn to deal with the sales taxes without losing your mind and without losing your business. You really can. It's not, we have to settle in our minds that yes, states have a lot of power now. And yes, even having a customer in another state may mean we have to collect their sales tax. It's too bad. So I don't want to cheer too much like, isn't that exciting? No, that's bad for business. But let's put ourselves in their shoes, but we need to deal with it. And there's easy ways to deal with it. It's not too painful.
Well, the other thing is that if you've got clients who have state and local, in particular, sales tax issues, you don't have to be the expert because there are firms, you guys are a firm like that, there are accountants, sales tax specialists out there who focus on just sales tax. And you can consult with someone, you can find them online in LinkedIn groups, you can hire someone just to do that aspect of your client work, you can contract with someone who's doing it, and so you don't have to, you can offer the service to your clients and be assured that they're going to be protected without having to amass a great amount of skill sets. There are 50 states, and it's a lot to learn, but you don't have to do it all at once, and you don't even have to do it at all if you want to outsource it. But and I think that's something that accountants don't always think about, but we often talk about accountants focusing on niche services, and when we say that, we often mean a vertical niche, like all my clients are in the restaurant business, or I just work with doctors and healthcare professionals. But there's also the ability to have a skill niche, like sales tax, and when you have clients needing that and you don't have that skill set within your firm, there are places to go where you can get that service and offer it through your firm to your clients.
Absolutely. You can become quite proficient at identifying risk. And then if avoiding risk or working towards compliance becomes complicated, then you can reach out and we can assist in those situations. But from the get-go, from the entry point, you can become very proficient at identifying risk and clients that might be in trouble.
Yeah, and the marketplace is adjusted in some ways as well. Online sellers are collecting tax like Amazon is. And so there's a different requirement now. If that online seller is collecting tax on your behalf, you need to be compliant and file a return. In Europe, the EU mandated that Amazon do VAT filing or offer that as a service. In the United States, that hasn't been mandated, so it's still the seller's responsibility to file those returns where appropriate and understand it. And so as an accountant, understanding that compliance part needs to be part of the conversation. If somebody is actually, it's bad if you collect tax and don't remit it. I think we can all admit that.
And 4 out of 5 CPAs surveyed said they don't want to go to jail.
Is that right, Ulf?
4.5. I think it's 4.5.
4.5?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So can we put together kind of a cheat sheet, or what are the questions that you should be asking your clients if you want to find out or make sure that they're being compliant or to find out if they're at risk?
Yes, we actually do have a cheat sheet. One place you can go to salestaxforcpas.com. That's one of our websites, and it'll lead you to a webinar where we teach you all these things and give you some tools. It's a 5-question survey to ask your clients, but really it comes down to finding out where your clients have customers. It used to be, where do you have a business, where do you have employees, but it's really about where do you have customers. That's where it starts. Nexus is still a thing, but Nexus is a lot easier to get. You know, one thing, Ray, that you've mentioned is that Amazon collects tax everywhere, which is true. And in some states, they even collect it on behalf of a seller and remit it on behalf of the seller. Yes. And some people say, well, that's the ideal scenario. That'll make things really simple. But in fact, it makes things worse. Take Washington State, for example, where Amazon is headquartered, where Avalara is headquartered. Washington has a very aggressive sales tax. They have no personal income tax, but that's one state. That's the first state where Amazon said, okay, where Washington required Amazon as a marketplace facilitator, you're going to collect tax for all your sales made by anybody, even if they're independent. They're going to be made, if they're made in Washington, you're going to collect the tax and remit it. So you think, hey, we don't have to learn about sales tax because Amazon's going to take all this over. Well, Washington also has the B&O tax. Right. So if you ask Washington, hey, I only sell through Amazon, and Amazon is now collecting my tax, do I still have to register with your state? The answer is yes. Okay, so I still have to file a return. Yeah, you do. You take your total sales, you back out the sales made by Amazon, report the rest. Well, it's 0. Okay, fine. But you still owe the B&O tax, which is on that same form. So it only got actually more complicated by Amazon stepping in. And as Gail, you astutely mentioned, there are 50 states. And every state has not every state has this idea that Amazon should be collecting sales tax on behalf of their sellers. So as with any tax law change, all of us know this that are in the business of tax, any tax law change, even if it's a simplification change, only leads to more complications.
That's so true. To add one complexity to that is if you need to register in Washington and not all of your sales are through Amazon, right? So if you have other sales, those sales still have to be reported by you. Only the Amazon sales are netted against your total sales.
Right, so, if you sell on eBay or through your own website, a Shopify cart, or through Walmart, not every marketplace has agreed to remit tax to Washington. Now you need to have a much more complicated sales tax reporting system in place in a state just like Washington.
All right, we're going to break one more time to learn a little bit more about Avalara, and then we'll be back with your third CPE code. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back.
Orange means being different.
It's a little bit of a jarring color because it kind of pushes the boundaries a bit, and I think that matches this company as well.
You can always tell when Avalara is in town. There's an awful lot of orange running around.
When I walk downtown, I notice all the people wearing orange.
And you can point to them and say, hey, you know, I know you, you're an Avalarian.
Somehow this color orange brings us in and say, let's move forward together.
Avalara's got a very unique approach to work and to life, and you know, it's a zany thing. We're in sales tax. We're a software company that's solving a compliance process. I mean, that's almost an oxymoron. So the fact that we might really embrace a sort of strange color like orange, or we work on an island that's off of downtown Seattle, it's all a little bit unique and weird. You gotta just love it.
We like to have fun. We like to joke around with each other. But that camaraderie also allows us to just really get some work done too when it comes to crunch. And then on 4 o'clock on Fridays, we all have a beer and a laugh about everything that happened during the week. So it's a good balance of the two.
Some large organizations I've been working for before were very different. You walk into a meeting, the first question they ask you is, what do you want from me? Whereas in Avalara, when you walk into a meeting room, everybody goes, how can I help you?
You can contribute and have ideas that are valuable and valued. And that is really exciting.
I think regardless of where you are in the company, there's really a sense of we're all pulling this together and everybody's job is important and we celebrate our successes.
Welcome back. And please take a look at the bottom of your screen and write down the third CPE code for this session if you would like to get CPE credit when your day is over. Okay, we're going to jump back in this. I'd like to ask you guys a question. Practically speaking, how can adding SALT to your firm's practice benefit the firm?
I'll step in here. So one of the podcasts we do is called NowAddSalt.com. So it's really all about not how can you become a salt expert. I don't think that that's reasonable. As you mentioned, there's so many things to know, but there are some things that you can and should know. So how can you practically add just a little bit of salt to your practice? It only takes a little salt to make things so much better, right? So here's some things you can do. That was good. That was good. You can do it. We've already talked about just talking to your clients. If you just talk, as you mentioned, Ray, just speak to your clients about sales tax and be ready with the answer. The answer is you can talk about Nexus, right? So we talked about that probably enough. But if you find that your clients have Nexus in other states, then there's two things that are good that can happen for you. One is if they have sales tax Nexus, they probably have income tax Nexus. And you already know how to do income tax returns for your clients. You already do their federal tax returns. You have software that can do their state income tax returns. You're already in a position to automatically expand your practice. The next question is, do you want to get into sales tax returns? And my answer to that is yes, you should, because increasingly there are opportunities for you there to file sales tax returns in kind of a delightful way. And Avalara is really good at helping you there. And Ray?
Well, I mean, if you just look at Amazon sellers that need to be compliant and file returns, there's millions of these returns that have to be filed. And it's really going to take the accounting community from the very smallest firms to the largest to participate, to be compliant for clients. And I do think that there's software. Avalara obviously has software. There's other options that allow you to help your clients in a simple and an automated way to be compliant. These packages integrate directly with Amazon. Get all the information comes down. It automatically goes into a specific state bucket, and you can file returns. So it's not overly complex, but it definitely shows a level of compliance that states are going to require. They're going to have the data. We've already talked about that.
From personal experience, sales tax return services compliance has become easier and easier. I want to say maybe 15 years ago, we tried to develop our own compliance software to do sales tax returns for our clients, and it was an utter failure. And then we tried multiple platforms and multiple processes. We've built that up over 15 years, and now we would say we do really well at that. But there are a lot of answers that make it easier than it was even 3 years ago.
Yeah, and I think that, and we've hit on this point over and over and over again, but we talk about the SALT moment because it's really not an option not to talk about it.
So true.
Before people wouldn't get caught. Small sellers, there was rules of thumbs that everybody had. If they sold less than $2,000, is the state really going to go after them? This and that. With big data and with the state's ability, obviously Amazon is really good at handling large quantities of data. States maybe not so much, but there's money in it for them. They'll hire somebody to come in and figure that data out.
Well, especially if Amazon's just turning over information.
Yeah.
Then all you have to do is do a mail merge and send out a letter saying, hey, we understand you're selling in Wisconsin or Washington, so tell me about that. So no big data needed right there.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that just that basic conversation is a place to start.
Critical.
And then if it gets complex, you can call a friend in another firm, you can call Peisner Johnson, you can call whomever to get help.
Yeah. There's another benefit to this now add SALT to your practice. I study the AICPA surveys of accounting firms, and one of the constant recurring themes, is they ask you what's your biggest challenges, is workload compression. Meaning, we really go crazy around April 15th, September 15th, and after that, you don't have enough to keep everybody busy. Well, for us, we don't have that in our practice. We do sales tax returns, and so we have a busy season, little mini busy season, every month, and so we keep our people busy throughout the year. So that's just another benefit if you can get into this area.
Okay, I've got a question here for Ray. It would be great if South Dakota treated the contractor's excise tax like a sales tax so that software can actually deal with it properly. Is there any pressure being made here by Avalara?
Yeah. No, we have a gentleman by the name of Scott Peterson who's actually from South Dakota, and we're involved in all the states. And you mentioned South Dakota, but Colorado is another state that we've had lots of conversations with. And if you'll give me that question specifically, and if you know who did it, I'll get them an answer on the exact area. But we deal with states all the time, and we deal with them at a compliance level as well as at a product taxability level that they're really talking about.
Okay. All right. As we're getting ready to wind down, are there any other specific points that you guys want to make to our audience about sales tax in general and ways in which they need to deal with their clients, again, to make sure that people are not being put at risk? And I just also want to throw in the fact that what's with Wisconsin being so aggressive?
Wisconsin is actually one of the more aggressive states for sales tax. And if you get audited by Wisconsin, they're pretty tough to deal with. So, and that's not one of your small states, right? It's not like South Dakota where you might not have any customers, or Rhode Island. It's if you sell online, then you have lots of customers in Wisconsin, so it's a big deal. As far as ways that your first question, Gail, I think that people can be a little bit afraid of what happens if I find a client that, we can look at our map and see what we need to do prospectively if they cross these thresholds, and we can handle that. But what if we find somebody like this Wisconsin situation that's been selling since 2015 in Wisconsin, and so now we have 3 or 4 years potentially of exposure? Well, that's where I recommend maybe getting a firm like ours involved, because once you have significant tax exposure from the past, then it becomes complicated. We have to, especially if they've contacted you already, you really want to, if you don't reach out to the state first and they contact you first, your options go way down. You really want to be proactive there. And dealing with past tax exposure, I think, is another level up, and that's where we can help you. If you get into a client that is filing in all kinds of jurisdictions, a bunch of local jurisdictions, that's another level up that you might want to get us involved in, so we can help you there.
One thing I'd just like to add, and full disclosure, I used to be a state and local tax person for Deloitte. I had a client who had nexus in 50 states, and they were filing taxes, state and local income tax and sales tax, in 5. So they had a bit of a problem across the board, and we wanted to get them current and started filing and contacting the states. But the thing that we found as we were going state by state to bring their tax position into a current status was that the states are actually negotiable. If you go in and you've got 7, 8 years of past experience and you want to bring yourself current and you want to make good with them, it's not necessarily going to be tons of penalties and interest. And I mean, there are opportunities to work out a plan and make inroads into the state so that you have a comfort level and can move forward. Because ideally, that's what they want, is for you to move forward and work with them.
They do have some advantageous remedies. And that's why I kept cautioning as we talked early on about economic nexus, is the worst thing you can do in a situation like that is just register them in all 50 states or all 45 states that impose a sales tax, because that exposes them to that previous amount of time and sales. So there are a lot of programs. I think every state has a program by which you can voluntarily disclose your situation, and they will waive penalties. Some will waive interest. They limit how far they look back, where some states, if you've been there 7 years, can look back 7 years if they find you. But if you come forward, maybe they look back 3 years or 4 years. So very advantageous to taxpayers when they're in that situation.
You know, generally to your point and to what you were saying, the states want to collect the taxes going forward. Right. You know, that's really what they're looking at. They want, you know, people to be compliant. Now, we all know that there's large pots of money looking back, and that's what you have to watch out for. The other thing is, don't go out and register right away. If you find that your client has been selling, you know, make sure that you understand the consequences of registering before you look at these consequences. And I think that that's fairly basic. Everybody knows that, but just a caution. And then the last thing I'll leave you with, I went to my first holiday party last Friday night, and somebody asked me about sales tax. That's a first. I've been to going to holiday parties. What am I, 64? So probably since I was 8 years old when my parents had parties and I'd run around. And I've never
ever asked you about
nobody's
sales tax.
asked me about sales tax.
There you go.
Okay, before we wrap up, just real briefly, would like to hear just a word from our representatives of Peisner Johnson, because they are sponsors of this session. So take it away.
Great. Sorry, Jason, I think you were about to say something.
Take it.
So I've already mentioned that you should be talking to your clients. It's to your advantage. Obviously, we are in the business. We call them clients because that implies we're there to protect them. In protecting them, you'll grow your business, and that's a wonderful opportunity. We do a mentoring group so if you want to learn more about Nexus, you can learn about it. If you want to learn more about how to price your services, how to speak to your clients, what's the angle that you should take, then you could join our mentoring group. You can learn all about it at salestaxforcpas.com. Really, that's our mission, is to really help educate CPAs and accountants in how to grow their business using SALT as their differentiator. And that's really what we're all about.
Great. Thank you all so much. This was a great session. I hope you all got a lot of useful information from this. Please stay with us. We'll be back at the top of the hour with a new session on the shared economy and its impact on team building and talent development. We'll see you then.